Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to slowly take your seats. Thank you very much for joining us here for the second plenary. My name is Monika Koszynska, and I'm the WHO cross-cutting lead for economic and commercial determinants of health. Now, this is a very special moment for me because not only is this my first PMAC, but PMAC is bringing to the global agenda for the very first time. It's the first major global public health conference that has put commercial determinants as one of its strategic priorities. So my great thanks to the organizers for bringing us together today and for challenging us with this highly topical and at times sobering discussions that we've had over the last 2 days. It's a great privilege to be here, and indeed, it's been my privilege to lead the global program on commercial determinants over the last 3 years at WHO. And under the leadership of Dr. Naoko Yamamoto, who's also with us, WHO decided to establish a function to help us scope and understand the impact that the private sector and commercial activities have on our health and health equity. But without any further ado, let us move to the plenary discussion this morning. We have an outstanding set of speakers and panelists for you today, and I'd like to respectfully disagree with one of my moderators yesterday. I am certain that we will learn something, and I have no doubt that, myself included, we will take something new away from the discussions this morning. So this sub-theme here at PMAC wants us to think about what is it that we can do about the challenge that commercial determinants plays for all of us. How can we move forward on this agenda? What strategies and approaches can mitigate the harmful effects of commercial determinants of health, and instead ideally channel their influence to promoting fairness, equality, and overall well-being, not only for our individuals and communities, but also for the planet. And as we've heard over the last 2 days, or the last days, this is perhaps one of the greatest global health challenges of our time. Indeed, some of our contemporary scholars have called this the greatest global health challenge of the 21st century, placing harmful externalities from commercial practice at the center of every failure we are seeing in global health. From access to essential COVID-19 medicines and therapeutics, the looming tsunami for non-communicable diseases, and of course, war, conflict, and climate change itself. Last year in March, a group of over 30 scholars from 6 continents published the Lancet series on the commercial determinants of health. And they estimated that 1/3 of global mortality is attributable to just 4 industries: tobacco, alcohol, unhealthy food, and fossil fuels. So PMAC has challenged us, and this is a challenge for all of us, not only for our plenary panel today, to consider the geopolitical considerations at the heart of commercial determinants of health, and to identify policies and interventions that can help us reshape commercial practices to put health and social equity, and I will add environmental justice, at the heart of business goals, and in shaping also the rules and financial drivers that govern businesses' behavior. But before I start us off, I would like to take a short poll in the spirit of yesterday. Can I please see a show of hands from the room? And it's a little bit difficult to see you. How many of you had heard of commercial determinants before your preparations for PMAC? Can I see? Oh, that's a good number. I think we have half. And of those of you, how many of you feel confident that you can walk out of here and explain what are commercial determinants to your colleagues, to your friends, to your family? Very brave people. I will not ask you to do so. Or perhaps later we can. But very good. So let us see that as a challenge for our speakers, for our plenary. And ladies and gentlemen, may I remind you that this session is recorded, and I would like to move to our first presentation from today, which is from Professor Lawrence Gostin, who is Distinguished University Professor at Georgetown University, which is its highest rank. He's the Faculty Director of the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law and the founding O'Neill Chair in Global Health Law. He is the Professor of Medicine at Georgetown University, this is difficult to say, and Professor of Public Health at Johns Hopkins. Professor Gostin is also the Director of the World Health Organization Collaborating Center on National and Global Health Law. So colleagues, when we are ready, if we could start the presentation from Professor Gostin.
Good day. I'm Larry Gostin. I'm a professor of global health law at Georgetown University and faculty director at the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law. I'm very sorry I can't be with you in Bangkok. I had intended to, but I'm unable to be there. We're shaped not by this idea that we all have autonomy and free will, but we're shaped by a number of key determinants of health. One is a social determinant and a geographic determinant. We're surrounded by like-minded people. If you were to probably say what is the one major predictive value for our health or our lack of health, it would probably be our postal code. We're also shaped by our economics, what income and economic wherewithal we have, what the economic and social safety net might be. And then we're shaped literally by corporations around the world. Let me begin by saying I'm not one of those zealot public health advocates who's anti-corporations. I'm not anti-business. But having said that, it's important to understand that they shape our lives for the good and oftentimes for the very, very bad and hazardous in ways that may be conscious but also not very conscious. So let's talk a little bit about the major commercial determinants of our health. The one we're all most familiar with is tobacco, of course. Tobacco at one point was ubiquitous, and it still is in many parts of the world, particularly in low and middle income countries. And so as high income nations have developed more rigorous tobacco control, cigarette and other tobacco companies and vaping companies have moved to other parts of the world to try to poison the citizens of that area. And so it's really literally been determining the health of countless millions, if not billions, of people around the world, causing untold harms of cancer, respiratory diseases, heart diseases, and a number of other things. We now pretty much understand that, although it continues in many parts of the world, even with the WHO's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. We understand that fossil fuels are responsible for climate change, but I don't think we really understand the full nature of it. We have governments that are organized based upon the idea of more and more fossil fuel energy. We subsidize corn and other products to try to create ethanol and other things to burn fuels with. Car companies, road transport companies, and others lobby and push us really hard. My dad used to say, and my children, the car is the enemy. And truly, that's true. We organize all of our life around cars, so much so that it's not just the industry that urges more fossil fuels, more cars, more roads. We as individuals do the bidding of these companies, and we insist because The car, like tobacco and others, have been seen as, an accoutrement of a good life, but also a symbol of freedom, a symbol of hope and autonomy. But it's exactly the opposite of that. And then there's the alcohol industry. The alcohol industry really has gotten a free pass. Most people think, if anything, a little bit of wine is good for you. It's not, by the way, not even a little. And we call people who are against or in favor of alcohol control, party poopers or others. The industry has really told us and convinced us that alcohol is necessary for much of the fun of our life. Just like tobacco used to be, if you look at the movies, when people are really kind of sitting back and enjoying themselves, it's either at home with a glass of wine, in a pub, with the kind of social camaraderie of that. People don't really kind of realize the harms that alcohol presents. I've seen some very credible scientific evidence to show, for example, that the overall harms of alcohol rival, if not exceed, those of tobacco. That might seem shocking to you, but it's true. If you talk about the long-term effects of alcohol, if you talk about alcoholic poisoning, if you talk about violence due to alcohol, the control of alcohol, if you talk about injuries and car crashes, alcohol has a lot to answer for. And yet we advertise it, we promote it as something, as an unalloyed good, and the industry has convinced us to advocate for it ourselves. Eating healthily is really hard. We've been really shaped by the food industry. And even me, who's really tries to be very, very thoughtful about my food, I can go into a supermarket and be fooled. It's like a shell game. Basically, all of the unhealthy foods are at prominent levels in the supermarkets. We are gravitated toward them. The food industry knows that salt, sugar, saturated fats of various kinds or another addict us. And it is literally a shell game. You'll see labels that will say low in sugar, which means it's high in salt and saturated fat. Or low in saturated fat means it's high in sugar, or high in artificial sugars. It's always hard to find something that's just plain, simple, whole foods. It takes a lot of work to have a healthy diet, all because of the way that the industry shapes our thinking and really guides our purchase choices. We are literally ruled. As a human species, probably more than anything else we can do, we're affected by what we put in our mouths. And we put horrible things in our mouths. And the reason we do that primarily is because of the way that we're advertised, labeled, and sold our foods. And then there's the technology industry. Technology can be a very good thing, but we've now got artificial intelligence, social media that feeds us mis and disinformation. It feeds us mis and disinformation about our medicines, our vaccines. Think about COVID-19 pandemic. There are so-called influencers telling us about nutritional supplements, foods that we eat, crazy diets that we have. But social media teaches us exactly the opposite about our medicines, our vaccines, our food, and so many other areas in our lives. So let me just pivot now to regulation. Why don't we just let the companies self-regulate? Well, the reason we don't and shouldn't is because companies have an enormous incentive, economic incentive, to drive us to do unhealthy things. And if we give them the opportunity to self-regulate, we will be deceived and we will get something that's less than we need to. So we need really strong regulation. We need good labeling laws. We need laws that prevent them from lobbying and changing the political and legislative environment to create what's good for them rather than what's good for the people. And we need strong, positive, legal regulation of what they do that's enforceable and with only one guide, what is good for our physical and mental health. So if you regulate strongly in one country, then they will go to the less regulated environment. We see that with tobacco or other regulatory initiatives. And so we need somehow regulations that span different national environments, including taxation. That's really hard. So we need strong institutions. We need strong coordination in terms of multilateral regulation. And let me just conclude by what would we really like if we were really thinking about the kinds of places we would want to live in? What would they be like? Well, essentially, there would be getting up in the morning and turning on the tap and having clean, potable water. They would be going to the kitchen and having safe, nutritious food. They'd be leaving the house and having safe mass transportation. There'd be walking paths, there'd be biking paths, there'd be playgrounds, there'd be parks, there'd be clean air. But in fact, if you go to most major cities in the world, you'll see the exact opposite. It's making us all sick. It's making us sick physically, it's making us sick mentally, it's making us sick emotionally. We know intuitively what the kinds of communities we want to live in. And the question is why we don't. And the reason is that there's an unholy alliance and an unhealthy alliance between commercial manufacturers who gain profit from making us unhealthy, and then lobbying legislators and government to do their bidding, and influencing consumers to want the products and advocate for the products that make themselves unhealthy. What a life, what a world. We can do much better, and we must, and we know the way to do that. Thanks very much.
Some strong words there from Professor Gostin, who very nicely took us from where I think a lot of us understand commercial determinants in how the products themselves shape our behaviors, how commercial exposures to commercial marketing influence what we do and what is available to us. But then he also took us to explore how these, for example, our use of cars shapes our built environments and uses of technology shapes our social environments. He made a strong call there, I think, for regulation and strong institutions, and left us with a very clear vision of affordable and healthy common goods. And we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail with the excellent panel and very experienced panelists that we have in front of us. So you have three of us physically, or three of our panelists are here physically and one virtually. And our first panelist is going to take us into really the deep, dark origins of commercial determinants. So tobacco, we heard it from Professor Gostin, it's the only commercial product that kills half of all those who use it exactly as intended, which is quite extraordinary. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Bongon Rittipakdi, the Executive Director of the Global Center of Good Governance and Tobacco Control. Can I please ask you to join us at the podium? Now, Bongon is the founder of the Southeast Asia Tobacco Control Alliance, which is the regional network in ASEAN countries on tobacco control, as well as the founder of the GGTC, which aims to promote good governance governance and the fight against tobacco industry. And her commitment to this has been recognized by the WHO, where she was awarded the esteemed World Tobacco Day Award. Welcome, Bungon. Now, thank you very much for joining us. And from that excellent and challenging introduction by Professor Gostin, can I ask you to share your experiences in the tobacco control world and what you would say the main lessons are?
Thank you, Monica. Sawadika. Good morning, colleagues. Before I answer Monica's questions, may I tell you an interesting story. 40 years ago, when visited land in Bangkok or other city in Asia, there were big signs welcoming them, not to Bangkok, not to Hong Kong, or not to Manila, but welcome to Marlboro countries. We have been since in a war with tobacco industries, a war against the power of aggressive lobby by the industry. However, the outcome is very incredible. Comprehensive tobacco control policy were in place in many countries in most of the world. No more tobacco advertising. Prominent health warning on cigarette pack were required. Tobacco tax and price were increased. But most importantly, millions of lives have been saved. So Monica asked that, what are the lessons learned from tobacco controls? There are three critical components contributing to this progress: strong evidence, empowered citizens, and good governance. So on the strong evidence, the 1964 U.S. Surgeon General report was a critical landmark report in alerting policymakers and the public on the harm of tobacco use, and followed by thousands and thousands research studies that have been used in developing tobacco control policies in the past year. However, we have a challenge at the moment because tobacco industry is tactically funding the research to support its agenda. So be mindful of the declaration of interest on the research that are being used when developing policies. Second component is empower citizens. It is important because more empowered citizens make more accountable states. But the question is, what are needed to efficiently empower citizens? Knowledge and information technology may be the first on the list, but experience from many countries indicate that to enhance and empower social participation, it is critical to have adequate and sustainable financial support. In Thailand, since 2001, there is a law requiring the tobacco and alcohol industry to pay additional 2% excise to the Health Promotion Fund, or Thai Health, who is using and managing this fund to empower communities, to strengthen relevant systems, and to enhance knowledge generations. Currently, Thailand support more than 20,000 projects and innovations across the country to counteract all the faults from all commercial determinants of health, not only tobacco. There have been a lot of movement leading to both policy developments or policies change at national level, but also sustainable development at the local level. Last but the most important component is good governance. Colleagues, since 2005, the whole world has a powerful public health treaty, the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, or FCTC, which 184 parties have ratified. The Article 5.3 of FCTC obligates government to protect their public policy from commercial and vested interests of the tobacco industry. Among important recommendations are to reject partnership and non-enforceable agreement with tobacco industry, as Professor Lawrence mentions. Countries have enacted measures such as code of conduct for their public officials not to engage the tobacco industry in policy development and to interact with the industry only when strictly necessary. At the global level, I'm happy to acknowledge that the UNDP has applied FCTC Article 5.3 in its engagement policy with the private sector. The UNDP's policy is a good example of how a UN agency can protect its operations from interference from industry that harm health. I would like to conclude by quoting an important statement made by Dr. Rudiger Kresch, Director of the Regional Department of Health Promotion. He says to the press last week, I quote, "Good progress has been made in tobacco control in recent years, but there is no time for complacency," end quote. Indeed, there is no time for complacency because tobacco industry has already introduced a new war, leading to a global vaping epidemic, especially among kids. Our children and grandchildren are being targeted again by tobacco industry, but in a new form. Colleagues, lessons learned from tobacco control clearly confirm that challenge from commercial determinant of health never ending but evolving. Let's commit ourselves to advocate government, to advocate the whole society, and to advocate international agencies to prioritize health over wealth and put it in the national target and a global agenda. Thank you. ขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you very much for sharing with us your valuable lessons and a very strong message and direction for what we need to do. And I'm delighted that you mentioned the WHO FCTC because, of course, it is one of our rare but very important pieces of international law in public health. And Article 5.3, which has been so fundamental, as you mentioned, to a lot of the progress that we have seen stemming the interference that is endemic in this area. But that is for tobacco. And our colleagues working in other areas, particularly in alcohol and foods, do not have something similar. So do you have any key messages for colleagues who are not in the tobacco space? What can they learn from you?
Yes. I think that the critical challenge is how to deal with the private sector, especially when they request to be part of the solutions, because they say that they are part of the solution. So they want to talk, to be consulted by government and organizations. But please be mindful that when the Ministry of Health or government try to control malaria, mosquito, they didn't hire law firm, they didn't hire lobbyists, and they didn't hire PR agencies. But it is completely opposite with the tobacco, alcohol, or food. So it is very important that government has the preventive measure to protect the public policy or policy development process from interference by the industry. So imagine that if the door is open to alcohol or food to sit and participate in the policy making process without clear rule or clear principle that what is transparent interaction, what interaction are necessary or unnecessary. So I think that the most important part is the good governance and policy and measure to have the very clear guidance, especially to government officials, which should be protected from the lobbying by the alcohol and food industry. Transparency, good governance, and the clear code of conduct is very important. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I will resist asking you any more questions. I think we could talk about this for the whole plenary, but we have 3 other speakers, and I'm going to move to our next speaker now. If I can just check that we have Dan online. So Dan is virtually joining us, or he should be, if I'm not mistaken. If we can, there we go. Thank you, and good morning. Thank you so much for getting up early to be with us here. We're delighted to welcome our second panelist, Dan Smith, who is the director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. He has extensive research and writings on security, conflict, and peace, working for over 4 decades in a number of positions, including serving on the UN Peacebuilding Fund Advisory Group, including twice as chair, as part-time professor of peace and conflict, and Secretary General of the London-based peace-building NGO International Alert. So Dan, we're particularly grateful that you were able to get up and join us today, and also because you are taking us out of our comfort zone, I think, today. For most of us in the room, we're definitely familiar with tobacco. Some of us will have been working also in areas of unhealthy food and alcohol, but your work very much focuses on much broader issues of security and its implications for health. Could you share with us why you think that these are areas that we cannot ignore when we think about the determinants of health?
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me early. First, an apology that I couldn't join you in Bangkok for this. I wasn't going to be a hero getting up in the middle of the night. I was going to be just an ordinary person with you, but I'm afraid some personal affairs intervened, and so I wanted to fulfill my commitment to be speaking to you and with you and listening to what everybody is having to say this morning. Listening to Professor Gostin, I think that it is not so very far out of what you call the comfort zone for you to move in order to understand the importance of the more geopolitical peace and security issues that I deal in, and their influence upon health. I mean, to understand the impact of peace and conflict on our well-being, I think is really fairly straightforward. We understand it, I think, pretty clearly when it comes to actual conflict and actual violence. And I think it would probably be generally agreed that peace is part of the foundation of our well-being. I mean, without peace, we don't have either human or social well-being. In a broader sense, looking at the impact of war and conflict on our well-being, I mean, look at the war in Ukraine. Not to go into at all what is happening in Ukraine or between Russia and Ukraine, but the consequences when the governments of two of the world's major food-growing countries go to war are enormous. The increase in food insecurity during the past nearly 2 years since Russia's, you could call, re-invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The consequences for food insecurity, for children's nutrition, for malnutrition generally, bringing people closer to the point where they really do not know where the food today is coming from. And these consequences are deep, and they have enormous and long-lasting effects on people's health, as I guess the audience knows much better and in more detail than I do. Look, instead of at Ukraine, look at Gaza, and look at the impact that the ramifications of the war in Gaza are having on world trade because of the attacks which are being made on shipping and the retaliation against Houthi forces in Yemen for their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. The impact of that on trade can be enormous, and the impact when trade is seriously interrupted. I think 80% of the world's trade goes by sea, and 30% of that goes through the Red Sea. So it's the outbreak of war and conflict has impact, obviously, primarily in the location and at that moment, but also additionally and deeply well beyond that location and that period when the fighting happens. If you go a step further, and instead of thinking simply about the impact of war and conflict upon health and well-being broadly, and think about international relations and geopolitics, one could take many examples, but probably the one which is the most recent, the most vivid for us, is the way in which geopolitics got in the way of a fast flow of information and of clarity of thought and action over the pandemic. And in fact, what happened in the early stages of the pandemic remain an irritant in geopolitics, and remain therefore an irritant and a problem in thinking about how to address the situation when the next pandemic, which I'm afraid is fairly much inevitable, breaks out. At the same time as thinking about the impact of peace and security upon us, we can think about the impact or the influences that exist on peace and security. Obviously, one of them is the geopolitical dimension, the rivalries, the tensions, the ambitions of different political actors. Put that in one category, one sphere, and then think alongside it about the social and economic determinants that lead to more to instability within countries, carrying risk of upheaval, of violence in that upheaval, of a repressive response, and of civil war breaking out. So a second category that we normally put under the heading of human security, sitting alongside the first that's often thought of under the heading of national or state security. And then the third category that we're thinking about, with, I think with increasing concern these days, the category of ecological insecurity, where at the forefront of most people's understanding of this problem is climate change, and the very strong evidence which shows, I think unarguably now, that the climate change can have an impact upon societies, that becomes itself a major driver of upheaval and a major risk factor for violent conflict and insecurity down the road. And I think if you simply sort of step back, step away from the direct health issues with which you're most directly concerned, and think, as Professor Gustin has been encouraging the audience, to think about that broader corporate and, through the influence of corporations, behavioral influence upon our health, you can see an awful lot of parallels in that same mode of thinking which is required in order to understand the impact upon our health and our well-being of geopolitics and of the risks of war and security. So just for opening the topic up a little bit, I'll just leave it there. Thanks for your attention so far.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I'm not sure if you can hear the room, but you are getting a round of applause. So I will wait for it to subside before I ask my follow-up question. So thank you very much for explaining to us and elaborating how issues of security are indeed our business, and health is the business of those working in security. And my question to you, I think for many of us in this room, this is not our day job. What would you say to the public health community? What is how can we address it from a public but also global governance standpoint? What is our role?
I think I would continue with my sort of track of parallelism with what Professor Gustin was saying to you. I mean, first of all, one needs to be thinking, or perhaps the theme of one's thinking is connection, making connections. First of all, one needs to be thinking about connecting the different issues. War and peace, and the prospects and the risks of war and peace are self-evidently a part of the story when we talk about health, indeed when we talk about psychological well-being and health, as well as about physiological well-being and health. We can see that, we can demonstrate it. So I'm not saying that peace and security is primarily or purely a health issue, or that health is primarily or purely a peace and security issue. But these questions are linked. If you wish to deal with the challenges in one sector, you need to be dealing with the challenges in the other sector. And what I'm going to go on and talk about at more length in the session later on, where I'm giving a slightly longer talk, is the importance of thinking in a connective way between these different areas that themselves are characterized by lots of internal interconnections in security, health, ecological well-being, and so on. I think the second thing that one needs to be thinking about in this connective light is between the longer term and the shorter term, not just to be thinking about the immediate time or moment and the immediate location where the crisis is, but to think about how chronologically and geographically these impacts flow outwards. It's like dropping a pebble into a pond. The ripples reach the edge of that pond. And I think it's very close to what Professor Gustin was talking about, but it's a different aspect of the same thing, the clarity of thinking which is required. He was thinking about, breaking through the corporate, the advertising, the way in which the food companies manage to structure your supermarket experience. I'm thinking about how we manage to maintain a clarity of thinking and an allegiance to the facts and to the evidence amidst what we used to call propaganda and enemy images, and which we now call disinformation and the social media bubbles. So this challenge to be thinking clearly and to be seeing through the mist of all of the distractions which are thrown up in front of us to stop us from thinking clearly, it's very, very parallel. If you in the public health community can be doing that, then the last point that I would make is that as when I'm talking with the humanitarian community about these issues and why it would be useful to find a way to speak out, is you have a great deal of moral capital to cash in. People will pay attention.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Thank you very much. And I'm seeing some applause in the audience for this as well. And Dan, I hope you can stay with us because with time allowing, we will try to take questions from the audience in the end. So moving to another invited guest from the public health community, it's my great pleasure to introduce our third speaker for today. And if I just organize my notes, forgive me 1 second. And it's very important, I think, we've been talking about the private sector and commercial actors. And so it's really an honor. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Pipit Anekniti, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who is the leader of a Capricorn bank here in Thailand. He has a background in pharmacy, so you're not too far away from us in terms of your origins. And this is not your first PMAC, so you're not certainly not a complete newbie to this area. But he is an experienced banker, and his leadership has positioned the bank both physically and virtually in Southeast Asia's burgeoning trade and investment activities. He has 2 decades of professional experience with a wealth of expertise in capital markets, project financing, credit, and risk management. And importantly, he gained this when joining the bank amidst the Asian financial crisis in the 1990s. And we know, of course, that financial crises are very important determinants of health. So Pipit, thank you very much for joining us today. You represent a sector which we don't often think about, but actually has enormous implications for health and well-being. What do you see as the role of banking in contributing to addressing these public health challenges from the commercial determinants of health?
Okay, thank you so much, Monica, for your wonderful introduction. But I just would like you to be honest with you, right? And I'm lucky enough that you didn't turn to me when you asked the question whether anyone really understands, the term commercial determinant. Of course, I understand commercial determinant, but I have never heard commercial determinant of health. This is my first time. And along, the discussion on this panel, I learned quite a lot, from the other speakers, from other panelists. So may I first of all, bring you back, but I try, to conceptualize what I understand about, and then, try to relate to your question from Silk Road to Silk Road. This is my interpretation. Why? Because of the wrong economic model. And then let me go through it. I think, we have been learning a lot about the plague of Justinian's travel to Byzantine along the Silk Road, and Christopher Columbus brings smallpox and measles to the Americas. And recently, we heard about HIV, AIDS, SARS, and most recent one, the COVID-19. I just would like to bring to the attention here that throughout the long course of history, commercial activities has been intricately linked with health and disease, introducing new illness to different parts of the world, to every corner of the world. And as global connectivity continues to grow, has increased over time in the pursuit of wealth maximization, has surged as consequence, but might not be the health condition, as Khun Pawan just mentioned. I'm sure now we dance in sync, between the wealth and the health, but I represent the wealth as a banker, and this is my first time that I need to pay attention also to the health. So, but when we look at this slide, what I'd like to convey the message is that the global trade and the capital expansion, expanding market outreach, particularly, by the MNC, multinational companies, and the growing global demand, based on the demand side as well, foster increased interconnectedness, and this amplifies the influence of the hidden actors, particularly large conglomerates, transforming consumption dynamics. Bank, no exception. We are a part of the global capital market who allocate resources, to the real sector. But whether or not, knowingly or unknowingly, directly or indirectly, positively or negatively, banks have assumed the roles of hidden actors, and I would say, because we are the one who allocate the capital to the real sector, to economic activities. And sometimes, I would like to say, without well-informed information, lead to a complex global influence. And now, I think, on this stage, we would like to put a little bit more towards the negative connotation, and that we need to be really fully aware of. So I would like to say this, the harmful impacts start to unfold, shaping the environment, consumer behaviors, and the public health detrimentally. So as a part of the global investment and banking financial service community, I would like also to say that we recognize these issues are crucial going forward. And we are, I think, ready to commit to building a better future in a more sustainable world. But we need to change the way we work going forward. And to my last slide, I just like to sum up here, can you imagine looking at this curve, at the small curve, or the first part to the left-hand side, the healthiness, this is a traditional way of conventional economic model, i.e. the wealth maximization, right? Regardless of the health condition, that might come up as a negative consequences to the wealth maximization. So basically, the conventional enterprise valuation model, you can imagine about the stock price, right? It's dependent upon the profit, right? I think that you as individual, you invest in your portfolio in a pension fund, you look at the return, right? But at the same time, if you would like to change the economic model, the equation from the conventional economic model, which is dependent upon the profit maximization, you add 2 more factors, you can add even more, than 3, 4, 5, in the future. So the profit is going to be discounted by the greenhouse gas emission. The profit is going to be discounted, further by the negative consequences from the health impacts from the commercial the determinants of health. And this is going to be the new equation of the economic model. And that will need strong collaboration, strong institution, and also the strong regulation as well. So this is my ending slide that I would like to introduce on this part. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pitten. And I have to say, this could have been a public health presentation. I definitely would not be out of place in any number of discussions on the economic and commercial determinants of health. And I think, and it's extraordinary. I'm sure I'm not the only person who is looking at this and thinking that this is an incredibly ambitious vision to acknowledge the recognition that the harms, the externalities that we are seeing are harmful, not only to health and the environment, but also to profit and business. And fundamentally, our commercial actors are doing what they are designed to do, and they're doing it very well. And they are designed to bring wealth, to drive profits, and this is their behaviors and their actions are doing their job. And my question to you, Pipit, is again, what to achieve your vision is going to be, the devil is in the detail. Forgive the English expression. So the implementation of that is where the hard work begins. What do you see as the role for the public health community? What do you need from us in order to be able to help you? As the finance and as the people who are driving the investments and the finance and the capital that is the lifeblood of our profits community.
I think I would say, we as bankers, we don't really understand much, on the public health problems, right? But as long as we have clear regulation, because we are regulated institution, as bank or financial institution, right? But again, rather than waiting for perfect regulation, right? I think, the well-informed decision-making on the day-to-day operation in the banking and the financial services industry, right? It can be in forms of declaration of the new practices, of the guiding principles, of the policy, and also even, by values and purpose of the organization, rather than waiting for the perfect regulation or, anything related to regulatory framework. Right.
That's a very strong message. So regulation is fundamental, but not to use a lack of regulation as a barrier to actions. I think that's an excellent endpoint. And again, we could discuss this for the whole hour, but I cannot. I must move on. So we're still doing well for time. So last but certainly not least, it's my great pleasure to introduce our fourth panelist today. And I think I may have lost my introductory notes, but I do not need them because I know your background very well. So Nathan Money, who is a lecturer in commercial determinants and public health at the University of Edinburgh. Now Nathan has the honor, the accolade of publishing the first book on the commercial determinants of health, which I think is now 2 years ago. And certainly your body of work has contributed significantly to our work as WHO and across the emerging scholar area that is the commercial determinants of health. Hang on, I've lost the order of my notes, so I'm going to put that up. So, Nathan, we've heard a lot about different aspects of commercial determinants. We had a good starting, strong introduction, Professor Gostin. We heard about tobacco, the broader security industries, and the role of finance. Now, can you tell us, in your work and your experience in commercial determinants, why is this such a challenge for public health? Tobacco is not new. We've had more than 4 decades of knowledge of public health. Why are we not able to do what we need to do about it?
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, can everybody hear me okay? Is it a bit echoey? Okay. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Is my microphone okay? Yeah, we're doing good. It's a really good question. I think part of the reason is the power imbalance fundamentally, if that makes sense. Now, this isn't just a case of making arguments based on evidence and then those arguments remaining, because it's sort of like you're resisting a constant, pervasive, strategic set of actors, and they're adapting all the time. And as was mentioned by the previous speakers, they're very good at that. So that's one of the reasons that I think it's very difficult. In a way, if I could use a metaphor, we in public health are engaging in, for example, health promotion or influence of policymakers. And it's like we have a little watering can, and we're influencing our policymakers with our evidence, we're speaking to the public, we're engaging civil society. But, these companies are behind us with a fire hose, They just have orders of magnitude more scale, impact. That's part of the problem. I think another part of the problem, especially thinking beyond just tobacco, I think part of the problem is tobacco exceptionalism. I think there is still a very ingrained sense, and certainly it's reflected in our governance and our conflicts of interest management, that the tobacco industry is kind of unique and it requires unique consideration because of the evidence of its undue influence on policy processes, on evidence. But really, we now have a much better understanding that a lot of what the tobacco industry did, it is also perpetuated by companies in similar positions. Companies who stand to lose revenue, future revenue, if they are regulated, or if public understanding of their harms grows, right? So it stands to reason they would use the same tools, the same third-party organizations, the same arguments to achieve the same goals because they're good at what they do. So I think the knowledge-action gap is growing more obvious, and it's larger than what it needs to be. I think another aspect is just how pervasive, and I mean that in the context of the global health community and international institutions, the influence, not just in terms of finance, but in terms of the the framing, the ideas, and the language that these actors have been afforded over time. You know, it reminds me of the example that David Forster Wallace gives in a lecture, where he's giving a lecture to these graduating students, and he tells a story about two young fish swimming along, and they pass an older fish, and the older fish says, "How's the water, boys?" And the two fish swim past the old fish. And after a while, one of the young fish turns to the other and says, "What the hell's water?" You know? It's because what is around them, what's surrounding them, is so, it's so pervasive and so everywhere as to be kind of invisible. And I think that applies in global health as well, particularly in the context of partnerships, right, and corporate social responsibility. So I think that is a big, big challenge, and we need to bear witness to that challenge more and more.
Yeah, thank you very much for that very considered response. And I think this sort of bearing witness and shining a light on some of these issues is really where we're seeing a step change in the academic community. I mean, certainly in my, I'm not going to mention how many, but more than one decade in public health now, we're seeing quite a difference in both volume and attention to commercial determinants of health. However, it is still very much focused in particular industries, in particular geographies. What do you think we need? We have many, many scholars and academic colleagues in the room and listening, I'm sure. What would you say is the message to the academic community at the moment in a what is critical but still very emerging field?
Well, I think, first of all, there's already been a great deal of work that's been done across a range of contexts. I think part of the challenge is synthesizing this evidence across lots of different disciplines, not just health, but marketing, psychology, trade, law, ethics. You know, there is a lot to be gleaned and learned. There are a lot of people globally who've done research that's very relevant to commercial determinants, but who wouldn't self-identify as being part of a particular community or acknowledge that, be aware of it. I think the other aspect is that we need to find ways to build global communities of research and practice, because a lot of these challenges are not constrained to country borders. You know, they're global, and so they require global cooperation, global capacity building. And I think a crucial aspect of this is fostering regional expertise, you know, giving a space and attention and an opportunity to local and regional experts, because commercial determinants of health vary hugely by geographic context too. You know, I mean, there's almost no research that I can think of really on the garment industry, for example, or on extractive industries related to rare metals, right? Salt mines. These kind of things are incredibly impactful on health. Banana plantations, Central America, incredibly important commercial determinants of health in the regions in which they operate, but we just don't have the evidence on those. And I hope, and I've been really encouraged by the work that the WHO has been doing in trying to surface this asymmetry, this information asymmetry, and to provide tools to member states, hopefully going forward, that they can assess the priorities in their local region and can turn the evidence that we have into monitoring tools, into infographics, into material that's meaningfully useful to policymakers when considering trade-offs. Because I think what's one of the key challenges we have, and maybe some of you in the audience are thinking this challenge is too broad, or this is just a question of political ideology and priorities. But really it's not that. It's about making empiric and moral arguments about what matters to health and how we can improve it, which is at the core of what public health is.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I'm really, truly sorry to say that we're out of time for the plenary. Unfortunately, we only had 1 hour this morning, so I'm not going to be able to open it to the audience for questions as we're bang on 10 o'clock. But we heard a lot of synergy across the very diverse and very rich interventions that we had. And just to pull some of this together, I think that the themes of, and Mongon, you set us three key messages on evidence, social participation, and good governance, and that's, we heard again and again your point here about moral authority and asymmetry of information is critical for policy and action and moving forward. The issue of Dan, you asked, you told us, or you urged us to think about in a connected way between different disciplines, between different impacts, and understanding that as communities, perhaps individual communities on tobacco, food, medicines, whatever it may be, even communicable diseases, whether we think of commercial barriers to access to therapeutics, or indeed, for example, commercial drivers of habitat destruction, which leads to increases in zoonotic diseases and so on. So the connectivity, we're seeing the same challenges repeated in different areas, but the specificity is very important there as well. The role of regulation, Mongong, Larry mentioned it, but also you, Pip, it's the important cornerstone of good governance that comes with in terms of building institutions, but also the importance of shared values and purpose, and seeing this as a common challenge, not just for us in public health, but also those of us who sit on the wealth side of the fence. Perhaps it's not a fence, perhaps it's a different room in the same boat, a slightly bigger one, perhaps. But colleagues, please, if I would just like you to join me in one last time thanking all our speakers and panelists today, and the organizers for bringing this topic, this very important topic to us. And if I could ask you to put your hands together.